I used to think our house was normal. Pale blue siding, white porch railing, cedar trees that smelled sweet after rain. From the outside, it looked peaceful, the kind of home people drive past and think, a family lives there. They'd be right, technically. There was a family inside, me and my father, Martin Rains. But what went on behind those windows wasn't peaceful. It was ritual. Every morning started at 5. My father would knock on my door, soft but sharp. "Evan, it's time." I'd stumble out of bed, rubbing my eyes, and meet him at the dining table. 2 plates, 1 Bible, 1 candle burning in the middle like we were dining with God himself. "Repeat the verse," he'd say, voice low and calm. If I yawned, he'd start again from the top. If I hesitated, he'd say, "The word doesn't wait for the lazy, son." We'd go through an hour of prayer before breakfast, before I even looked outside. Afterward, he'd hand me a list. Chores, scripture study, sometimes just lines from sermons I had to copy into my notebook. Repetition builds faith, he'd remind me. My friends, well, I didn't have any. He never allowed visitors, no phone, no TV, no internet. He said the outside world was infected with lies. So I stayed inside and listened to him. For years. When I was little, I used to ask about Mom. Her name was Sarah, though Dad never said it out loud. He'd just tighten his jaw and quote, "A woman must be faithful to her home." I didn't understand then, but I do now. The only thing I knew was that she left when I was 6. That's what he told me anyway. She didn't fit God's design for this family. He said it with such conviction I almost believed him. Still, sometimes at night when the wind hit the cedar branches just right, I swore I could hear a woman humming. A soft, distant lullaby, one I'd never heard before but somehow knew was meant for me. It started with dust. A Saturday afternoon in May, sun bleeding through the blinds. Dad told me to clean the attic while he prepared for Sunday's reflection night. I hated the attic, the smell of mildew, the faint scurrying of mice in the corners. I was halfway through sweeping when I saw a brown paper bundle wedged between boxes of Christmas lights. I pulled it out, coughing as the dust flew. Inside was a photo album, cracked leather old as time. The first page stopped me cold. My mother, young, smiling, holding a baby wrapped in a blue blanket. Me. Her eyes were kind, not like the way Dad described her. As I turned the pages, my stomach twisted. Her face was blacked out in every later photo, thick marker strokes carved into the paper. In one, she stood beside Dad, and he was holding the same Bible he still carried every morning. It looked like a family until it didn't. When Dad came home, I tried to sound casual. "Hey, Dad," I said. "I found some old photos upstairs." He froze mid-step. His eyes flicked to the attic door, then back to me. "Photos?" His voice stayed calm, but something in it shifted. "Yeah, just, me and Mom. You guys looked happy." He set his Bible on the counter and walked toward me. "Evan," he said softly, "some people don't know when to stop asking questions." I tried to laugh. I didn't mean anything, I was just... Curiosity is the enemy of faith. His tone hardened, but his smile never changed. That was worse than shouting. The next day, the album was gone. So was the brown paper. When I asked, he said he'd disposed of temptation. That night, the humming outside my window sounded louder. Only this time, I didn't think it was the wind. 2 weeks later, he woke me before dawn. "Get dressed," he said. "We're going for a drive." He never liked driving. Said cars made people lazy. So when he told me to grab my coat, I felt my stomach twist. We drove past the city, past familiar gas stations and stoplights until the houses thinned out and the road turned to gravel. I watched the cedar trees blur by, the silence stretching like wire between us. Finally, he pulled over beside a clearing. The air smelled like dirt and rain. "Evan," he said, hands resting on the steering wheel, "you're almost a man now, old enough to understand what family loyalty means." He got out, opened the trunk. I followed slowly. Inside were my mother's things. A necklace, a red sweater, a camera, all neatly folded. He touched the sweater like it was sacred. "She broke the circle," he said. "But I forgave her. I always forgive." My heart pounded. "Dad, what do you mean?" He looked up. His eyes were glassy, calm. "She wanted to leave. She thought she could hide from God. But God doesn't lose his flock." The way he said it made my skin crawl. I stared at the dirt by his boots. Fresh, dark, disturbed. "Dad, we should go," I whispered. He smiled faintly. "Don't be afraid, son. Faith demands sacrifice." The ride home was silent. I kept my eyes on the window, counting mailboxes, memorizing turns. When we got back, he went to the basement to reflect. The door closed. The lock clicked. I sat in my room, shaking, clutching the old camera I'd taken from the trunk. It was heavy, too heavy, like it carried truth inside it. I didn't sleep that night. The house was too quiet. Even the creak of the floorboards seemed afraid to speak. I waited until the clock hit midnight, Dad's prayer hour. I could hear him downstairs whispering verses between the hum of the furnace. I stuffed a few clothes into my backpack, grabbed the camera, and crept toward the front door. But as my hand reached the knob, I heard a sound from the basement. A voice. Faint. Trembling. A woman's. I froze. My breath caught in my throat. "Please," she whispered. "Don't let him—" A sharp thud cut her off. Then silence. Then Dad's voice, calm, low, reciting Psalm 51. I ran. The screen door slammed behind me, and I sprinted barefoot down Willow Street. The air was cold and raw against my skin, the gravel cutting into my feet. I didn't look back, not until I reached the main road. A pair of headlights approached. A truck. I waved frantically. The driver, an older man, slowed down. "Kid, you okay?" I just kept saying, "He's not right. My dad's not right." The police came the next morning. I told them everything. The prayers, the rules, the photos, the trunk. They didn't say much while I spoke, just nodded and wrote things down. When they searched the house, they found the basement spotless. Fresh bleach, tools organized, floors scrubbed to bone-white shine. No woman, no body, no blood. But behind the cedar trees, the same ones that hummed at night, the soil was freshly turned, 6 feet wide, 2 feet deep. Dad was gone. They issued alerts, searched neighboring counties, but he'd vanished like mist. The camera I brought them had photos inside, old ones of me, Mom, and one I'd never taken, me asleep in my bed, shot through my window. Months later, I was in foster care, learning how to breathe again. I'd wake some nights to the sound of a car engine idling outside, but by the time I looked, the street was empty. Then one morning, a letter arrived. No return address. Inside was a photo. Me, sleeping in my new room. On the back, written in his handwriting, "The circle is never broken, son." I moved again. I still check my windows every night. Sometimes I dream of cedar branches swaying and a voice saying softly, "Family is forever." And every time, I wake up praying that's a lie. Blind obedience can disguise the darkest evils. Family should never demand silence, fear, or submission in the name of love. True faith, true loyalty. They thrive only in freedom, not control. Trust your doubts. Sometimes questioning is the only thing that keeps you alive. I still remember the night I met Harold Pierce, though I've tried my best to forget it. It was late December of 2017, and Maine was drowning in snow. The kind that doesn't just fall, it devours. I'd been living out of my car for almost 3 months, sleeping in the back seat with my coat pulled over me like a blanket. The diner I worked at barely paid enough for gas and soup. But I kept going, 1 cup of coffee at a time. That Sunday night, the highway was nearly empty. The world outside was white and soundless, like the whole planet had frozen mid-breath. I was serving the last of the truckers when he walked in. Middle-aged, tall, clean-shaven, wearing a wool coat and a gentle smile. His eyes were the color of faded denim. "Evenin', miss," he said, setting his gloves on the counter. "Cold one out there, huh?" "Coldest of the year," I replied, forcing a smile. I was tired, but his calm voice carried warmth. He ordered black coffee and a slice of apple pie, tipped $20 on a $5 bill. Over the next few weeks, he became a regular, always in the same booth, always at closing time. I started to look forward to those quiet moments. He'd ask about my day, tell small-town jokes, quote scripture sometimes, and end each conversation with, "Stay warm, Lena. The Lord looks after wanderers." He never flirted, never made me feel uneasy. That's what made me trust him. When my car broke down during a snowstorm one night after work, I sat crying in the freezing dark, steam rising from the hood like smoke from a dying beast. I didn't even see his headlights until he was already pulling over. "Lena?" he said, stepping out. "Are you hurt?" I shook my head. "No, just stranded." "Well?" He smiled softly. "No one should freeze to death trying to make it home. Come on, I live just off County Road 47. I'll drive you there. Got a spare room and hot stew waiting." Every instinct screamed, no, but desperation has a way of quieting instincts. The wind bit through my jacket, and the snow was falling too thick to see. So I nodded. His farmhouse sat like a ghost on a hill surrounded by white woods and silence. He parked in front of the porch, helped me with my bag, and led me inside. The warmth hit me like a drug. The place was old but spotless. Polished pine floors, lace curtains, and pictures on the wall, portraits of a woman and a young girl. His wife and daughter, he said. They went to be with God a few years back. He made me tea and we talked by the fireplace. His voice was slow, almost melodic. Before I went to bed, he said with a strange tenderness, "Lena, dear, one small rule. Never open the basement door. That's where the house keeps its past." He smiled, but the light in his eyes dimmed a little when he said it. I thought he was joking. I laughed. He didn't. The next morning I woke to the sound of a piano, soft, almost mournful. The melody drifted through the hallway like smoke. I followed it to the living room, where Harold sat playing, eyes closed, lips moving silently. When he noticed me, he stopped and smiled. "Morning, sleepyhead," he said. "Breakfast's ready. Hope you like eggs and toast." The smell was heavenly, but something about the scene felt too staged. Everything in that house had its place. The books, the silverware, even the cushions were aligned perfectly. I tried to ignore it. Days passed with strange repetition. He'd wake me at dawn with the same hymn. We'd eat together, pray, and he'd talk endlessly about faith, purity, and obedience. I'd help him shovel snow, clean dishes, or read old church bulletins he collected. But he never stopped watching me. Every movement, every word. Once I locked my bedroom door before sleeping. The next morning it was open. When I confronted him, he smiled gently. "Trust builds safety, Lena. Locks build walls." I didn't argue, but something in his tone, it wasn't fatherly, it was possessive. That night I heard something beneath the floor, a faint hum, then a soft clank, like metal brushing metal. The sound came from the basement. The next morning, Harold was scrubbing the kitchen tiles on his knees. His hands were raw, red, bleeding. "You okay?" I asked, stepping closer. He didn't look up. "Sin leaves stains, dear. Some stains take longer to clean." I tried to laugh it off, but the smell of bleach burned my nose. Later, I noticed something else. A flicker of light under the basement door, around 2 a.m. I'd see it every night, like a candle glowing through the crack. Once, curiosity almost got me. I stood in front of that door, hand on the knob, heart hammering. But before I turned it, I heard his voice down the hall. "Lena, obedience brings safety." I froze. He was standing there in the dark, Bible in hand, smiling. I didn't sleep that night. By the end of the second week, my nerves were shot. Every sound made me jump. I needed to leave, but the storm had buried the roads again. The phone lines were down, and Harold said the snowplow wouldn't come for days. He acted like everything was normal. I acted like I believed him. One afternoon, while he was out chopping wood, I searched the house for a phone signal. Nothing, just static. In his study, I found old photos, not of his wife and daughter, but different girls, dozens of them, some smiling, some not. None looked older than me. Then I heard it, a faint drip, drip, drip from below, the basement. I shouldn't have gone near it, but something inside me, fear or maybe instinct, pushed me. The door was locked, but the key hung on a hook near the pantry. My hands shook as I turned it. The smell hit first, bleach and rust. Then came the sound, soft, wet, and human. "Hello?" I whispered. A sob answered. I stepped down slowly, flashlight trembling in my grip. The concrete floor was slick. Chains hung from beams. Old jars lined a shelf, each labeled with a name written in faded ink. And then, a voice. "Please help me." I froze. The sound came from behind a wooden partition. Before I could move, a shadow appeared at the top of the stairs. "Lena?" Harold's voice was calm. Too calm. I turned, and he stood there holding a Bible, face half lit by the bulb. "The Lord tests obedience," he said. "You almost failed." He closed the door and locked it. Darkness swallowed me. When I woke, my wrists burned. I was tied to a chair, basement floor cold under my bare feet. Harold knelt in front of me, humming that same hymn. "Why are you doing this?" I choked. He smiled kindly, brushing a strand of hair from my face. "Because, dear, the world has dirtied you. But don't worry, I can make you pure again. You're sick." He slapped me, not hard but sharp enough to silence me. Then he began reciting verses. His words echoed off the walls like a sermon in hell. He brought water, a bucket, and a rag. "We'll wash the lies away," he whispered. Every time I begged, he prayed louder. His eyes shone with fanatic devotion. "You remind me of my daughter," he said once. "She disobeyed too." That's when I realized what happened to them. His wife, his child, the others. I waited until he left to fetch more bleach. I saw a nail sticking out of the wall and started sawing at the rope around my wrists. My skin tore, but I didn't stop. When he came back, I was ready. "Ready to be saved?" he asked, stepping closer. I swung the chair leg. It shattered against his arm. He screamed, dropping the bucket. I ran, slipping on the wet floor, grabbing the keyring from his belt as I passed. My fingers shook as I fumbled at the door lock. He lunged. I kicked backward, heard him crash into the table. The door burst open and I bolted up the stairs, barefoot, bleeding, gasping. "Lena!" he roared behind me. "You can't leave before you're pure." I ran into the snow, blind, lungs burning. His voice followed, humming that same cursed hymn through the trees. I reached a ranger cabin miles away, pounding on the door until my knuckles bled. When they found me, I was half frozen, mumbling prayers that weren't mine. The authorities went to the farmhouse the next morning. The basement was spotless, bleach on every surface. No bodies, just chains, jars, and children's shoes sealed in plastic. Harold Pierce was gone. His truck abandoned by the river, doors open, Bible on the seat. They searched for weeks, never found him. I spent months in therapy jumping at every sound. Sometimes I still hear that hymn in my dreams, the one he played every morning, soft, slow, like a lullaby written by the devil. 2 months later, I got a package at the halfway home. No return address. Inside was a folded church bulletin from the Holy Shepherd Mission, County Road 47. Written in perfect penmanship. "Obedience brings salvation. I'm still praying for you." I burned it in the sink. But every now and then, When snow falls heavy and the wind carries through the pines, I swear I can hear the faint echo of piano keys, and his voice, whispering my name. Evil often wears a gentle smile and speaks softly of faith, trust, and love. Never let desperation silence your instincts. The truest faith lies not in blind obedience, but in the courage to question what feels wrong, even when kindness wears the mask of salvation. I was 17 when I realized our house had stopped feeling like home. Maybe it was the way the wind screamed against the windows, or the salt that never left the air, or maybe it was just grief wearing new disguises every day. After Mom died, everything tilted. My little brother Milo stopped talking for a while. Dad stopped smiling. The funeral came and went like a fog, and then there was silence. Long, heavy, endless silence inside that weathered gray house on the cliff. Dad used to be gentle. He'd tell us bedtime stories about shipwrecks and old sailors, pour hot chocolate on stormy nights, and let Milo fall asleep on his shoulder. But after the accident, his warmth turned into rules. He said routines helped him keep the world in order. He said Fridays were special. He called them family nights of truth. The first time, I thought it was his way of coping. Just a game. He brought out a deck of worn playing cards and a small notebook with our names written neatly across the top. Douglas, Olivia, Milo. He set 3 wooden tokens in the center of the table and smiled the way people smile when they're trying not to cry. Games reveal the soul, he said. We play, we confess, we heal. We played like it mattered. He'd shuffle, deal, and every time someone lost, they had to share a truth. It started small, favorite color, biggest fear, dumb lies from childhood. But soon, the questions changed. What's something you've hidden from me? What's something your mother never knew? His voice never rose. He never sounded angry, but his eyes, sharp, glassy, waiting, made me feel like every answer was a test. That first Friday ended with him patting my hand gently. Good. Honesty keeps the family pure. I didn't sleep that night. A week later, I noticed the camera. It was small, silver, almost invisible above the kitchen shelf. A red light blinked, just once every few seconds. I thought maybe he'd bought it for security, but when I asked, he smiled too wide. Observing behavior keeps the soul aligned, he said. After that, I started noticing more. A black lens tucked near the living room clock. Another on the stairway. One hidden behind a vent in the hallway. Always blinking. Always watching. Milo caught on too. One morning, he slipped me a folded note under the table. I think he reads my journal. I wanted to tell him it wasn't possible, but I didn't believe that myself. Dad seemed to know everything. When we whispered, when we lied, when we dreamed of leaving. Every Friday night, the game continued. He kept score in his notebook. Losers confessed. Winners stayed quiet. Remember, he'd say, his hand resting on the cards. Lying is poison. Confession is the cure. Milo started to fidget whenever Friday came. He'd fake stomach aches or pretend to fall asleep early. But Dad always woke him, gentle as ever. We don't hide from the truth, he'd whisper. The truth was turning into a weapon. I caught him one night watching playback on the living room camera, whispering to himself like he was taking notes. Patterns, he said. Deviations. Lies. That was when I started planning. It happened on a stormy Friday. Thunder rolling in from the sea, windows rattling like warning bells. Dad set up the game as usual, calm, methodical. But Milo was trembling. Can we skip tonight? He asked softly. Please. Dad's face didn't change. Truth doesn't wait, son. Deal the cards. Milo's hands shook so badly he dropped them. Dad's smile faltered for the first time in months. Careless hands come from careless hearts, he murmured. Maybe you've forgotten what this night means. I don't want to play anymore, Milo whispered. The silence stretched so long I thought time stopped. Then Dad leaned forward, eyes sharp as glass. You don't get to decide that, he said. I reached across the table. Dad, stop, he's scared. He's learning, Dad snapped, voice cracking just slightly before he caught himself. We all are. That night, I found Milo crying in his room. He had a cut on his wrist, small, shallow, but enough to make me freeze. He said I lied about Mom, Milo whispered. He said she's disappointed in me. I held him until he fell asleep, the storm pounding outside. When I stepped into the hall, I saw the red light blinking again. Steady, patient, unblinking. 3 weeks later, I told Dad I needed to go to the store for supplies. It was the first time he'd let me leave alone since Mom's death. He handed me the car keys and said, "Truth runs errands too." Milo sat in the passenger seat clutching his backpack. We drove down the dirt road, past the cliffs, the fog so thick it felt like the sea had swallowed the sky. When I reached the curve overlooking the rocks, I slowed down and whispered, "Now." We jumped. The car rolled to a stop behind us, engine still running. We ran through the fog, down the slope, feet slipping on wet grass, lungs burning. I didn't look back, but I could hear something. The faint echo of Dad's voice carried by the wind. Games reveal the soul. We reached a neighbor's house just before dawn. I pounded on the door until an old man opened it, eyes wide. "Please," I gasped. "He's watching us. He's not right." The police came within the hour. They found the cameras, the notebook, the cards, the tokens. But Dad was gone. It's been years since that night. Milo and I live in Portland now. He's in high school, plays guitar, laughs again. I still wake up some nights to the sound of shuffling cards. But it's just the wind, I tell myself. The police never found him. They think he might have fallen from the cliffs or maybe just disappeared into the fog. But I know better. Sometimes late at night I'll be sitting in my apartment and a faint click will echo through the room, like a camera shutter. Once I even found a note slipped under my door. "Honesty keeps the family pure." Same handwriting, same calm phrasing. The police said it was a prank, but deep down I know he's out there, watching, waiting, maybe even proud that I finally learned the lesson he wanted to teach. Because now, I tell the truth. I tell it in therapy, in writing, in whispers to myself. And every time I do, I feel like he's listening. When love becomes control, it stops being love. Truth should heal, not haunt. Those who use honesty as a weapon twist faith into fear. And the only real escape is learning that freedom sometimes means breaking the rules written by those who claim to love you most. I left Boston on a gray Thursday morning. The sky heavy with rain and the memory of a lifetime in that cramped, toxic apartment weighing me down like a wet coat I couldn't shake off. My roommate, Liz, had always found ways to undermine me, belittling my art, borrowing my brushes without asking, and turning every little mistake into a catastrophe. I needed space. I needed air. I needed to feel safe again. And Vermont, with its dense pine forests and lakes that seemed carved from memory itself, called to me like a sanctuary. I packed my old hatchback with canvases, paints, a stack of journals, and the bare necessities. My parents were too far away to help, scattered across the country, and friends had their own lives. I was 30, alone, and utterly determined to begin over. I hadn't realized how much Boston had drained me until I hit the winding dirt roads of coastal Vermont, the kind that curled around hillsides and lakes with the careless elegance of something untouched by city chaos. That evening, at a small art festival in Montpelier, I met Gideon Hale. He was older than anyone I'd dated, maybe in his late 40s, with a calm voice that drew you in, and a smile that suggested knowledge but never arrogance. He complimented my paintings, spoke about technique, and seemed to understand the kind of obsession that came from loving your work too much. "Your brushwork," he said, tilting his head as he studied a watercolor of pines, "has the kind of honesty most artists lose by 25. Don't let anyone dull that." I felt warmth spread in my chest. Praise from strangers didn't usually move me. but something in his eyes made me feel safe. Weeks passed, filled with mentorship and long drives to secluded galleries where he showed me rare pieces he'd collected. Then, one evening, almost casually, he offered me a stay at his private cabin on Blackwater Lake. "It's quiet, private. Just enough space for your art to breathe," he said, voice gentle, eyes gleaming. "I promise, no distractions." I hesitated. The thought of leaving my city life behind scared me, but exhaustion and loneliness had clouded my judgment. I agreed. The cabin was stunning, perched on the edge of Blackwater Lake. Pine needles carpeted the ground outside. The air smelled of cedar, wet earth, and the faint tang of the lake itself. Large windows offered endless views of the water, and the wooden floors creaked underfoot, almost like the house itself was breathing. For a moment, I felt as if I'd stepped into a painting. Gideon's rules were simple but strange. No photos inside, phones only after 9. Never enter the lower guest room. At first I laughed. He seemed eccentric, harmless even. But then subtle things began to unsettle me. The way he watched me sit. The way he noted when I looked at my phone. His soft comments on obedience and curiosity. It wasn't menacing at first. It was almost imperceptible. But it made my chest tighten in a way I hadn't felt since the roommate fiasco. Then the small items started appearing. A rusted bracelet on the nightstand. A folded note with the name Marissa written neatly in ink. I asked him about them. "Reminders," he said, smiling but not warmly. "Curiosity, Claire, can be dangerous." At night I heard soft creaking above, the kind of slow, irregular noises that could be anything, or someone. The guest room, forbidden to me, seemed to whisper from below. I started locking my door, leaving the lights on, pacing the floors. Every shadow felt heavier than it should, every wind gust like a presence brushing past the windows. One morning I tried to leave, claiming I had an appointment in town. Gideon insisted on driving me, but he took a back road through thick pine and mud, the cabin appearing again and again, as if calling me back. My gut nodded. Inside he showed me a small room lined with envelopes and objects. Bracelets, photographs, sketches of women's faces, small personal items. My stomach dropped. "They were curious, like you," he said, voice calm but terrifying. I wanted to protect them from the chaos outside. Fear flooded me. Escape wasn't just difficult, it was being controlled at every turn. My pulse hammered in my ears as I realized I'd underestimated him, underestimated the danger. The windows, the back doors, even the forest around us, and everything felt like part of his trap. I began plotting quietly, noting exits, keeping my phone on vibrate in a hidden pocket. Each brush of wind against the cabin, each rustle of the trees became a countdown. He didn't need to speak to terrify me. The silence itself was a warning. The storm hit suddenly, lightning cracking over the lake, thunder rolling across the hills. I waited until Gideon was distracted with a fire I pretended to admire. Then I slipped out a side door, barefoot, mud squishing between my toes, pine needles scratching my legs. I ran without thinking, propelled by sheer instinct and the knowledge that hesitation would kill me. I reached the highway at dawn and flagged down a passing car. The driver, a middle-aged man in a faded pickup, didn't ask questions. I collapsed in the passenger seat, drenched, shivering, muttering only, "Somebody. Please. Help." Police later searched the cabin. Gideon was gone. The guest room was empty except for a rusted bracelet and dozens of envelopes labeled with women's names and dates. Some had letters inside, others sketches, all meticulous. The realization made my stomach churn. I hadn't been the first, and I might not have been the last. Months later, I'd moved to a small city, rented a studio apartment filled with my paintings, and cautiously rebuilt a life that had nearly been stolen. I still flinched at unexpected knocks, still smelled pine in strange places, still felt the lingering presence of someone watching. But I had survived. I painted late into the nights, poured myself into colors and shapes, and learned to trust myself again. My fear had carved a scar in my mind, but it had also taught me vigilance, courage, and the importance of boundaries. Sometimes, when I walk alone by a lake or through a forest, I feel the echo of that cabin behind me, the creak of the floors, the rustle of leaves, the shadow of a calm, piercing gaze. But I remind myself, I am no longer the frightened girl who followed blindly. I am Claire Donovan. I am alive. I am free. And I will never let curiosity blind me again. True independence and safety require discernment and boundaries. Trust is precious, but it must be earned. And courage is not the absence of fear. It is choosing to move forward despite it. Trauma may leave scars, but survival transforms them into wisdom. The first morning in my own apartment, the sunlight hit the pale walls like a promise. I brewed coffee, the aroma filling the small kitchen, and for the first time in years, I didn't have to worry about someone judging how I held the mug, whether the creases on the counter aligned with invisible lines etched in my childhood home. Portland, Maine felt like a fresh canvas, quiet, unassuming, and entirely mine. I'd grown up under my father, Ethan Lane, whose obsession with perfection was suffocating. After my mother died, he retreated into a world of rules. Every book lined perfectly on a shelf, every spoon equidistant from the others, every drawer folded with exact precision. A misplaced pillow or a crooked picture frame wasn't met with yelling. It was met with the cold, silent disappointment that gnawed at your confidence until you believed you had done something irredeemably wrong. Leaving that house had been my liberation. I changed cities, rented a small townhouse in a cul-de-sac lined with overgrown hedges, and told myself I was free. And for a while, I was. The apartment was modest, a tiny living room, a kitchen just big enough for me, and a bedroom I could close off from the world. I unpacked slowly, taking care to arrange things as I liked. Mismatched mugs, colorful blankets, and stacks of notebooks teeming with my sketches. I left a note on the fridge for myself, a small reminder. You're allowed to live your life your way. But it started almost immediately. Little things that made my stomach tighten. A sense that someone else was watching the angles of my life even here. My laundry was folded neatly, almost as if it had been pressed into symmetry. My bed was made perfectly. Pale blue sheets I hadn't seen in years, identical to the ones from my childhood bedroom. At first I laughed. Maybe a neighbor found a spare key. But no one had one. I double-checked. Every lock, every latch, every bolt was secure. Still, the feeling lingered. A subtle pressure at the edge of my mind, like static electricity brushing against my thoughts. I told myself it was paranoia, the last echo of years under my father's meticulous watch. But deep down, I knew freedom had limits I hadn't anticipated. Days passed, and the small disturbances became harder to dismiss. Objects moved slightly from where I left them. A vase on the counter would tilt, books on a shelf would be slightly rearranged. I'd open drawers to find them perfectly organized, each item aligned, almost mocking the chaos I was trying to cultivate in my life. One evening I cooked a stew I hadn't planned. The scent of cedar and peppermint suddenly hit me, faint but unmistakable, curling around the edges of the apartment. I froze, spoon hovering midair, heart thundering. No one should smell like cedar and peppermint inside my apartment, I thought. But then I tried to rationalize it. Maybe it was air from outside, a neighbor burning incense. When I reviewed my security footage, I saw a shadow slipping past the frame, tall, upright, familiar. The posture, the gait, the slow, deliberate movement down the hall. Unmistakably him, Ethan, my father. My stomach clenched. I had changed cities, changed locks, changed my phone number, even moved to a new state, and yet there he was, walking through my home without a single obstruction. He didn't force the door. He didn't break anything. He simply entered, as if his presence alone had the power to bypass walls, locks, and alarms. I tried to tell myself it was a glitch, a trick of light, but I knew better. I knew his control wasn't just about doors or locks. It was about presence, about a psychological tether that had followed me even into my adulthood. The morning he appeared at my doorstep, I nearly dropped the coffee mug in shock. "Harper," he said, voice calm, polite, with that same serene inflection I had dreaded all my life. "I just wanted to check on my little girl. You've grown so fast." I backed up, heart racing, trying to keep my composure. You can't be here. How did you find me?" He smiled, perfectly serene. "The world is chaotic, Harper. I just want to keep you safe. You can't truly live until you learn the rules." I wanted to scream, to slam the door, to throw him out like I had imagined for years. But there was no anger in his voice, only calm obsession. He didn't feel like a man invading a home. He felt like a force that had always existed, patient and relentless. "I don't need your rules," I whispered, trembling. "I live my life my way." "Rules aren't punishment," he said softly. "They are structure, safety. You will see one day." I shut the door and locked it 3 times. My hands shook. My body felt both exhausted and electrified. Even now, his presence clung to me, like the shadow of a tree stretching over my apartment, unmovable. I didn't stay. I fled that night, taking only essentials. I moved from friend to friend, city to city, trying to shake the sense that I was never alone. Even when I changed apartments, every subtle movement of objects, a slightly crooked picture frame, a folded napkin, a lingering scent, reminded me of him. I installed cameras. I changed locks. I asked trusted friends to check in, to help me feel some safety. I thought that moving was enough, but I quickly realized that the control he exerted wasn't bound by doors or fences. It was psychological, emotional, a tether stronger than any lock. Some nights I would wake, imagining him standing in the doorway, calm, smiling, waiting for me to falter. The fear of his return never fully left me, but I grew stronger. I documented, I planned, I fortified, and I reminded myself that my life, my choices, my freedom, belonged to me. Over time, I built routines. I learned to recognize the subtle signs of manipulation, the lingering scents, the oddly placed objects. I practiced mindfulness and therapy, learning to rebuild the confidence my father's control had eroded. I kept my apartment organized in my own way, not in fear, but with intention. I still flinched at unexpected noises, still smelled cedar or peppermint and felt a shiver run through me. But instead of panic, I reminded myself, these are memories, not current threats. I survived. I started dating, cautiously, slowly. I painted again, filling journals with sketches, colors, and landscapes of places I'd been and wanted to go. Each stroke reminded me that freedom is fragile, but it can be nurtured. I will always carry the scars, the lingering awareness that some control cannot be blocked with locks alone. But survival, courage, and discernment are stronger than fear. I am Harper Lane, no longer a child under watchful eyes. And finally, I live my life on my own terms. True freedom is not just about escaping physical confinement. It is about reclaiming your mind, asserting boundaries, and nurturing inner strength. Even when control lingers in memory, awareness and courage allow you to live fully and authentically. I grew up thinking my family was perfect. Our house on the quiet cul-de-sac in Burlington, Vermont looked like something out of a magazine. Colonial style, 2 stories, snow-dusted lawns in winter, trimmed hedges, and a small frozen pond in the backyard. From the outside, we had it all. Holidays in matching outfits, music recitals, barbecues that made neighbors nod approvingly. My mother, Claire Monroe, was warm and gentle, always smiling. My father, Gideon Monroe, was calm, composed, and demanding. But he had this way of making discipline feel like protection. I was 25 now, but I can still remember the first time I understood the difference between rules and obsession. It was a December evening when I was 12. My sister Lila and I were sitting on the couch trying to watch a movie when Dad walked past, muttering to himself. "Alex, Lila, the front door?" he said quietly, stopping mid-step. "Locked?" "Yes, Dad," I said, feeling the hair on my neck stand up. He nodded once, satisfied, then continued pacing, whispering numbers and calculations to himself. Lila leaned close to me. "Alex, he doesn't sleep, does he?" I shrugged, trying not to sound scared. "I think he sleeps with one eye open." By 16, I understood that perfection in our house wasn't just a goal. It was a cage, a crooked picture frame, a candy wrapper left out. Even a small lie could trigger silent correction. There was no yelling, no outbursts, just a calm, unwavering presence that would watch, observe, and wait until guilt crushed you. I tried to see it differently, to rationalize it as discipline, as care. But by the time I graduated, I knew the truth. The house was a prison, and our family had been its unwitting inmates. When I left for college, I thought I had escaped. I moved across town, convinced that distance could sever the chains of my upbringing. But even miles away, the effect lingered. I still flinched at sudden movements, still lined up my books just so, as though doing otherwise would summon some quiet judgment. The real fracture happened one winter night when Lila called me in a panic. "Alex, he's different now. Mom, she's yelling at me. I don't know why." I didn't hesitate. I drove straight back, the snow crunching under my tires, anxiety knotting my stomach. The house was the same, outwardly perfect. But the air inside was wrong, heavy, thick, charged with something I couldn't name. I found Claire in the kitchen, her hands trembling as she adjusted the sugar bowl. She looked up at me, eyes wide, lips pressed together. "Mom, what's happening?" I asked softly. She shook her head. "Gideon, something's wrong. I can't." Her voice trailed off. I realized then that the perfection I had admired from the outside wasn't care. It was a methodical erosion of autonomy. My father had taken patience and love and transformed them into control, using calmness as a weapon. I began noticing subtle changes. Furniture shifted slightly. Doors that should have been locked were precisely aligned in a way only he could execute. Journals rewritten in his hand. Every object, every gesture, every moment in the house seemed designed to instill the same quiet terror I remembered as a child. By the time I was 18, I had to confront him. One evening after dinner, I stayed behind while Lila went to her room. I took a deep breath and said, "Dad, enough. You're hurting Mom. You can't keep doing this." He looked at me, calm, serene. His expression never faltered. "Hurting? Alex, I am protecting her, protecting this family. You don't understand. The world out there, it's diseased. Only here is safe." I noticed then the hidden cameras, tiny, almost invisible, the meticulous arrangement of chairs and tables, the notes he left for my mother rewritten in his hand. It hit me like a punch. Safety in this house was a lie. The perfection was a cage, and he held the key. I wanted to scream. I wanted to break the cameras, smash the walls, tear down every rule he had etched into the fabric of our lives. But I also knew anger wasn't enough. If we were to survive, we had to be smart. Quiet defiance was the only weapon I had. That night I stayed awake watching the hall, cataloging every movement, memorizing every step he took, every pattern, every ritual. Survival required observation. I spent months planning. Lila and I couldn't simply run. We had to mask our intentions until the moment was right. We packed essentials quietly, leaving the house as if for a day trip. In the dark of night, we loaded the car, leaving nothing behind that could draw attention. Driving away, snow crunching under the tires, I felt an unfamiliar exhilaration. Fear still pulsed through me, but there was hope too. Claire, my mother, had moments of lucidity, even smiles, though anxiety lingered. Lila clung to me, silent and wide-eyed. as though afraid to believe freedom could exist. Even miles away, the house haunted us. I found letters slipped under doors, unsigned but unmistakable in intent. You may leave, but perfection always watches. You belong to me and to the family rules. I realized then that the most dangerous prisons aren't physical. They are built of observation, habit, and psychological control. Even in the open air, the shadows of his obsession followed us. But we were free, not fully healed, not fully unscarred, but moving forward. Years later, we live in a modest townhouse in a town where neighbors are kind but unaware of our past. Claire occasionally snaps, anxiety flooding her like winter ice, but she also laughs at small, ordinary moments. Lila sleeps with the lights on, still wary of shadows, but she smiles more often than not. I keep journals, detailing our experiences, observing patterns, and reminding myself of boundaries. I sometimes dream of the old house, the quiet control, the meticulous alignments, the invisible eyes that watched. But those dreams no longer terrify me. They remind me of resilience. The real horror wasn't the yelling, the punishment, or the rules. It was calmness paired with obsession, patience used as a weapon, and the invisible pressure of control that shaped every thought, every fear, every movement. I survived, and in surviving I found strength. I learned that even when control reaches deeply, autonomy can be reclaimed with courage, careful observation, and determination. Freedom is not forgetting, but choosing to live despite the shadows that linger. True control is not always violent. Often it is subtle, patient, and silent. Recovery requires awareness, courage, and the willingness to assert boundaries. Even when psychological scars remain, reclaiming autonomy and choosing your own life is the ultimate form of liberation. I never thought I'd be back in Willow Creek, Oregon, not after everything I had left behind. After my divorce in 2022, my life felt like a half-burned bridge I couldn't cross again. I had tried to start over in Portland, chasing freelance gigs and cheap coffee shops, but the emotional toll of a messy split, the betrayal and the loneliness left me hollow. I called my mom almost reluctantly. Maybe reconnecting with family would be grounding, or at least temporary shelter from the storm of my own life. The drive back was long, winding through damp forests where fog clung to the trees like breath. Every mile brought memories I hadn't revisited in years. My mom's laughter bouncing off the walls of our old house, my dad's quiet sighs as he tinkered in the garage, the smell of rain on the wooden porch. I tried to tell myself this was just nostalgia, not a reason to hope too much. But when I finally pulled up to the house, the familiar white siding and blue shutters made something ache in me I didn't know I had left. Mom greeted me at the door with her signature smile, the one that always made me feel seen, even as a teenager. "Vivienne, you're home. Come in, come in. You look tired." Her arms wrapped around me, and for a moment, I let myself sink into that embrace. The house smelled the way I remembered it, cinnamon and pine cleaner, soft and safe. Or so I thought. Over the next few days, Mom insisted on helping me settle in. She fussed over my room, unpacking boxes I hadn't even wanted to touch, and she introduced a routine that included daily pills she claimed would help me sleep and calm my anxiety. I was weary, raw from the divorce, and for once I let someone else take care of me. The pills were small, beige, easy to swallow, and she always handed them to me with that warm, steady gaze that begged for trust. At first it felt harmless. I slept better, my thoughts slowed, and I told myself that maybe reconnecting with Mom was exactly what I needed. But after a week, things started slipping. I would wake up in the middle of the night, unsure of how I got there. My arms bore faint scratches, and once a friend texted me back with words I hadn't typed. My stomach churned with unease, and the trust I'd given Mom felt suddenly like a trap. One night, I skipped the pills. The effect was immediate. The fog in my mind lifted, and I saw the house for what it really was, not welcoming, but quietly watchful. Shadows lurked in corners, Ordinary furniture seemed oddly positioned, and the silence carried a weight that made my skin crawl. That night, sleep came reluctantly, and my dreams were heavy with the sense that I was being watched. The next day, I started noticing oddities I had previously ignored. Smoke detectors that seemed oddly positioned, picture frames angled just so. My instincts screamed at me that Mom was watching, not just from a distance, but closely, intimately. I felt a creeping panic, a sense that the person I thought I knew, my mother, was something entirely else behind closed doors. It wasn't just paranoia. That night, I searched the living room and bedroom and found what I'd feared. Hidden cameras, their lenses disguised in everyday objects tracking my movements. Panic rolled through me like fire. I backed away from the frames, my mind racing. Every memory of Mom's warmth felt like a lie. I found myself in the study, a place I rarely entered as a child. There, behind the locked drawers, I discovered a small metal lockbox. Inside were meticulous records, names of women I didn't recognize, fake prescriptions, and handwritten notes detailing manipulative techniques. My hands trembled. The horrifying realization hit me. I wasn't the first. My mother, the woman I loved, had spent years drugging, monitoring, and controlling vulnerable women. The horror was incomprehensible. And just like that, the home I had returned to thinking it was safe had become a cage. I wanted to leave immediately, but fear and confusion pinned me to the study floor. The truth about my mother's life pressed down like a physical weight. How could someone who raised me, who had kissed my scraped knees and wiped away tears, be capable of such calculated control? I tried to process, but the house itself seemed alive, whispering the secrets it held. Every creak of the floorboards made me jump, every shadow seemed like it could lunge. I waited, heart hammering, until I heard the familiar shuffle of Mom's footsteps. "Vivian, what are you doing in here?" Her voice was soft, melodic, almost comforting. My stomach knotted. I was just looking for a pen," I lied, keeping my voice steady, though the room spun around me. She smiled, and that smile was different now, twisted, with an edge I hadn't known existed. "Just make sure you take your pills tonight, honey. You need to sleep. You'll feel better." She lingered, watching me like a hawk. My heart raced, but I nodded, pretending compliance. That night, I didn't take the pills. I stayed awake, pacing the floor, counting ceiling tiles, listening for her movements. Fear and adrenaline kept me alert. Hours passed. Then, in a fit of resolve, I decided I couldn't just sit and wait. I had to understand fully what I was dealing with. I returned to the study and examined the lockbox again. One drawer held binders detailing women she had controlled, dates, locations, drug dosages, escape attempts. Another drawer contained a set of syringes, some filled with amber liquid. Panic surged. I realized she had been preparing me from the first day I arrived, slowly dulling my awareness, eroding my ability to trust my own senses. I knew the moment I was caught would be deadly. My mother wasn't reckless. She was patient, calculating, precise. But I couldn't leave without evidence. I spent hours taking pictures on my phone, documenting everything. Every file, every hidden camera, every note could save someone else. Finally, exhaustion forced me to bed. My eyes barely closed before I heard the softest creak of the study door opening. I froze, heart in my throat. "Vivian," Mom whispered, her voice low, almost hypnotic. "Don't do anything foolish." I stayed perfectly still, pretending to be asleep. After a long minute, the footsteps receded. Relief washed over me, but I knew it was temporary. My mother would not stop. Not ever. I had to find a way out, carefully, quietly, without alerting her. My freedom depended on cunning, patience, and luck. And for the first time, I realized I was capable of both. The next night, I prepared. I memorized Mom's routines, the hours she spent in the kitchen, when she left the house, when she slept. My backpack contained a flashlight, my phone, and the small lockpick set I had brought on a whim. I had no idea if I could make it, but staying was no longer an option. At 11:47 p.m., as the house settled into silence, I slipped out of bed. My bare feet made almost no sound on the cold hardwood. I checked the living room first, then the kitchen. Mom's bedroom door was shut, and I could hear the low hum of the night. I moved to the bathroom, lifted the window, and forced it open. The cool air hit me like a jolt of electricity. The streets of Willow Creek were quiet, damp with fog. I ran, barefoot, heart slamming, ears straining for any sound of pursuit. I navigated the narrow roads instinctively, relying on memory from my childhood walks. Each step felt like liberation, but also like stepping out of reality into pure fear. After what felt like an eternity, I found the police station. My lungs burned, my hands shook, but I was alive. The officers listened, skeptical at first, but the evidence I had gathered, the photos, the records, the hidden cameras, left them no choice. Marlene Harper's reign of control ended that night, but the trauma lingered in me. Even years later, at exactly 8 a.m. and 9 p.m., I felt a chill run down my spine, a reminder of the pills, the fog, the control. Some memories, I realized, never fade. The authorities uncovered the depth of Marlene's manipulation. The women she controlled had been isolated, drugged, and psychologically terrorized. Diaries, medical records, and manipulated text messages painted a chilling portrait. I spoke to investigators, recounting my experiences, trying to make sense of what I had lived through. Each detail I shared was a tiny exorcism, a reclaiming of my voice and agency. Therapy helped me, slowly, to recognize that the trauma was not my fault. But the psychological residue remained. Flashbacks, mistrust, and moments of hypervigilance reminded me that freedom is not a cure for fear. Years later, I live in a small apartment in Portland. The fog of my past never fully lifts, but I feel stronger, more vigilant. I've rebuilt my life carefully, surrounding myself with people I trust. I returned once more to Willow Creek, not for closure, but to witness the house decay, stripped of the life Marlene controlled. The windows were broken, paint chipped, weeds overtaking the garden, the lockbox and cameras long gone. And yet, in the wind, I swear I hear faint echoes of control, whispers that the house remembers. But I have learned something crucial. Control can be taken, but trauma cannot always be erased. I cannot forget, but I can choose how to live. True freedom requires vigilance, courage, and the willingness to confront uncomfortable truths. Evil can hide in the most familiar places, even within family. And the only path to survival is reclaiming your voice, trusting your instincts, and never letting fear dictate your life. Trauma may linger, but strength and awareness can transform it into resilience. I never thought moving could feel this heavy. At 16, I'd already spent half my life watching my parents rip each other apart in courtrooms, lawyers' offices, and late-night phone calls that ended in yelling. When my mom announced she was marrying Victor Crane and we'd moved to Ashford, Connecticut, I was hesitant. Part of me wanted stability, yes, but another part of me was terrified of repeating the same cycle with someone new. Ashford was quiet, almost eerily so. The streets were lined with red brick houses and maple trees just beginning to shed their leaves, orange and crimson drifting across freshly paved sidewalks. Everything looked picturesque, like something out of a postcard. I should have felt lucky. I should have been relieved. Instead, my stomach knotted with unease the moment we pulled into our new driveway. Victor was waiting on the porch, crisp in his slacks and button-down, a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. He shook my hand firmly. "Ethan, welcome home," he said, and for a moment I tried to return the warmth. But there was rigidity to his posture, the way his gaze flicked to the windows, the way his jaw tightened for just a second before relaxing. He was polite, controlled, too calculated. The first few days passed in a blur of boxes, unpacking, and Victor's strict rules. Lights out at 10 p.m., no phone use after dinner, and most importantly, never touch the basement door. "It's just storage," he'd said, voice calm, reassuring. But the chains and padlock outside the door, heavy and industrial, told a different story. Victor's hands lingered near the doorknob more than once when he thought I wasn't looking, and sometimes I could swear he was listening, even when he was out in the yard. At night, the house spoke. Not with voices, not really, but with thumps, scratches, and the occasional low whimper that drifted up from below. Mom told me it was just the old pipe settling, but I felt it in my chest. The house was alive with something else. Curiosity wrestled with fear every time I heard it. I tried to tell myself it was nothing, but when sleep didn't come, the shadows seemed sharper, more menacing. I couldn't take it anymore one night. Around 3 a.m, I slipped from my room, flashlight in hand, and approached the basement. The door was massive, the chains cold under my fingers, the padlock heavier than I imagined. My pulse pounded in my ears. I turned the handle just enough to peek through the small crack. Then he appeared. Victor. Sweat slicking his forehead, eyes glinting in the flashlight's beam. "Go back to bed," he muttered, voice low but filled with a tension that made me freeze. I backed away without a word. He lingered for a heartbeat, then disappeared down the hall. My curiosity had cost me nothing that night, but my instinct screamed that whatever lay behind that door was dangerous. Days passed, but my unease only grew. I noticed Victor's routines, his odd hours, the way he checked the basement at odd times, the intensity of his gaze when he thought I wasn't looking. I tried to ask Mom about it, carefully. "Ethan, it's just storage," she said, brushing it off with a smile that didn't meet her eyes. "Victor's careful, that's all." Careful. The word lingered, taste bitter on my tongue. I didn't believe her, and one night, curiosity won again. I had brought a bobby pin from my bathroom kit. Standing before the basement door, I worked at the lock quietly, turning the pin carefully until the padlock clicked. My heart slammed. Slowly, I pushed the door open. What I saw made me freeze. Chains hung from the ceiling, swinging slightly, tools stained dark with something that smelled like iron. On the walls, Polaroids of boys, some familiar faces from the local school district, eyes wide in terror, some distorted in fear. My stomach turned. Bile rose in my throat. Every sound from the house seemed amplified. The ticking of a clock, the hum of the furnace, even the wind outside. I wanted to scream, to run, but I knew if I did, Victor would appear before I even got to the stairs. My hands shook as I grabbed one of the Polaroids and shoved it into my backpack. That would be proof, something to show the authorities, something tangible. Victor's boots pounded the staircase before I could think, and he appeared looming. "What are you doing down here?" His voice cut through the air, sharp and commanding. I pressed my back into a corner, forcing a casual expression, pretending to search for something I'd dropped. Victor stared for a long minute, eyes icy, reading me like a book. Then, almost without warning, he left, his footsteps heavy and deliberate. I stayed frozen until I heard the door click shut, then bolted to my room. The house no longer felt like home. It felt like a trap. The next morning I told Mom everything. My voice trembled, the words barely coherent. "Mom, the basement. There are chains, Polaroids. I saw them." Her face paled, but she forced a tight smile. "Ethan, I think you're imagining things. That door, it's always been just storage." I wanted to argue, to show her the photo, but fear stopped me. She had always been my anchor, my protector, and I didn't want to destroy that image of her. Instead, I packed the Polaroid in my notebook, hidden beneath the pages, a secret talisman of truth. That afternoon, I went to the local police station. Officer Harlan listened carefully as I recounted everything. My voice was shaky, my eyes wide, but I was determined to be heard. When I returned home with an officer, the basement appeared normal, just old furniture, Boxes, dust, chains gone, photos gone. Victor had vanished. The house was empty. My evidence, physical but fragile, was all that remained. Every sound in the walls, every shadow in the corner, reminded me he could be anywhere, watching. The officers took the Polaroid as proof, but they couldn't charge him without further evidence. I felt powerless. I had witnessed something monstrous, but the world outside the house couldn't see it. All I could do was wait, watch, and keep the memory alive. Months passed, but Ashford never felt safe. Every creak in the floor, every gust of wind against the windows, sent chills down my spine. Nights were worse. Sometimes I thought I could hear the faintest whisper, a voice carried on the wind. Shadows in the corners of my room made my stomach knot. School became an escape, but even there, my mind drifted back to the basement, to Victor's eyes, to the Polaroids. Friends noticed my silence, my jumpiness. "Ethan, you okay?" one asked. I forced a nod, smiled faintly, but inside I felt fractured. I knew one thing with certainty. Some secrets are too dark to fully uncover. Some truths live just beneath the surface, waiting to emerge. And some monsters don't leave a trail. They vanish, leaving only fear in their wake. Years later, I moved out of Ashford. College, part-time jobs, new friends. I built a life that didn't require me to look over my shoulder. But at night, in quiet moments, I still hear it. The metallic scent of the basement, the faint whimpers, the clatter of chains in my mind. The Polaroid still rests in my notebook under my bed. Sometimes I take it out just to remind myself that I survived, that I saw the truth and didn't succumb. Victor Crane is gone, or maybe he isn't, but I've learned to live with the shadows. I've learned vigilance, awareness, and the value of trusting my instincts. I've learned that fear, while paralyzing, can also be a guide. And though some secrets are never fully uncovered, survival is about reclaiming your life, step by careful step. The world holds darkness in places we least expect, and some monsters wear familiar faces. Awareness, courage, and trusting your instincts can protect you even when evidence is scarce. Survivors may carry fear and memories forever, but strength lies in acknowledging the truth and refusing to let it define who you become. I had always admired my mother, Rachel Whitaker, without question. Growing up in Eugene, Oregon, I watched her every night as she meticulously applied creams, powders, and masks, speaking in that calm, precise tone that made me think everything in the world had an order. She had flawless skin, soft hands, and a presence that filled the house like sunlight streaming through foggy windows. At 17, I still idolized her, even though I sometimes felt stifled by her rules. Lights out by 11, no unsupervised friends, strict curfew, and no wandering outside after dark. It was late autumn of 2020, the kind of cold night where fog curls around streetlights, and every footstep sounds louder than it should. Eugene was quiet, too quiet, and lately that silence made me uneasy. The news had been full of it, murders, dubbed by the local papers as the Stitcher murders, teenagers mostly, disappearing in the shadows. Something about the way these crimes were reported gave me chills, but I never thought, not for a second, that the danger could be closer than the fog-laden streets. That evening, I returned home from my part-time job at the bookstore. The streets were slick with rain, the wind sharp against my face. I expected Mom to be gone, maybe out for her nightly errands, but then I heard it, muffled sobs echoing from the basement. My heart stopped. I whispered, almost too softly to hear myself, "Mom? Is someone down there?" There was no answer, only the sound of something being dragged across the floor. Fear and curiosity collided inside me like two trains on a collision course. I gripped the railing, bare feet on the cold wooden steps, and descended into the dim light of the basement. The bulb flickered, casting long, uneven shadows. I froze. My mother's familiar face was twisted into something unrecognizable, something dark and predatory. She crouched over a teenage girl, one I didn't know, her hands busy with precise movements, draining blood into small glass jars that reflected the dim light. The air smelled sweet, metallic, and I gagged, my stomach twisting violently. Rachel looked up suddenly, her eyes locking on mine. The smile that curled her lips was terrifying, casual, and yet filled with a calm malice I had never seen. "Lena, you shouldn't have come early," she said softly, but I could hear the predatory undertone lurking beneath her words. My legs felt like lead. I couldn't move. Then it clicked. The red masks she had worn during her nightly routines, the ones I had assumed were just beauty rituals, they were made from human blood. My mind raced. I scanned the basement and froze harder. Shelves lined with small glass containers, eyes, teeth, hair, trophies from victims long gone. My mother was a monster, but to her, it was meticulous work, art even. I had no time to think. I grabbed a vial of sleeping powder from the counter, trembling so badly my hands shook. Pouring it into a cup of tea, I whispered under my breath, "Drink," praying it would work. Rachel's eyes narrowed, suspicion flashing for a heartbeat. Then a few minutes later, she collapsed, the calm violence gone, as if it had never been. I ran upstairs immediately, waking my younger brother Tyler. "Tyler, get your coat. We're leaving." My voice was urgent, shaking. Together, we slipped out into the rainy night, the chill and fog doing nothing to wash away the horror I had just witnessed. The police arrived quickly, guided by my frantic call. Rachel was arrested, and for once the news headlines matched reality. The Stitcher murders finally stopped. But even as officers led her away in handcuffs, I knew something about this wouldn't leave me. The basement, the jars, the calm in her eyes, some things lingered beyond the bars of a jail cell. And in the quiet of our home, every shadow seemed heavier, every reflection in the mirror slightly off. The day after Rachel's arrest, I sat on the couch staring at the walls of our home as if seeing them for the first time. It was too quiet. Tyler clung to my side, and I felt responsible for him in a way I hadn't before. "Lena, will she hurt anyone else?" he asked quietly. I hugged him tight. "No. No one else," I lied, though I wasn't entirely sure I believed it. As I wandered through the house, I noticed things I had ignored for years. Tiny glass vials hidden in drawers, a faint metallic scent in the laundry room, journals filled with diagrams and notes on skin, veins, and methods. Every innocent beauty ritual I had admired was tainted now, an act of horror masquerading as perfection. I began to question every interaction, every rule. Her insistence on structure, on control, on perfection. It wasn't just about parenting or skincare. It was about dominance, precision, and secrecy. She had spent years shaping our world, molding perception, keeping the truth hidden in plain sight. The police let me look at the basement again, but it had been cleared. Jars, masks, notes, all gone, catalogued as evidence. The stark emptiness left me with the weight of imagination. I had seen enough to know what was real, but the world outside could never fully grasp the horror that had unfolded here. Even small things haunted me. The way she had smiled while controlling life and death, the meticulous order she maintained while committing murder, the red masks that now seemed grotesque rather than beautiful. I realized trauma wasn't just about what you saw. It was about what you knew was possible. Tyler and I stayed with a family friend for a while. The nights were worst. Every time a shadow crossed the street, every time a stranger knocked on the door, I flinched. I imagined Rachel still watching, still planning, still smiling. I knew that seeing her taken away didn't erase the control she had exercised over our lives. I returned to the house slowly, needing closure, but fearing it at the same time. The basement was sealed, the lock sturdy, but every creak of the floorboards, every flicker of the lights reminded me of her presence. I couldn't trust silence. I couldn't trust stillness. School offered some distraction, but it was impossible to forget. Every reflection in a mirror, every careful glance at the news reminded me that someone I loved could hide something monstrous beneath a smile. The lesson was cruel. Monsters aren't always strangers. Months passed. Rachel's trial became a local spectacle. People were shocked, horrified, and fascinated. I tried to reclaim normalcy, school, friends, homework, but mirrors were my enemies. Every time I brushed my hair or looked into glass, I imagined her eyes staring back at me, calm, methodical, unbroken. Even Tyler asked questions I couldn't fully answer. "Do you think she'll ever come back?" His voice quivered. I hugged him tight, whispering, "No, we're safe now." Though a part of me always doubted. Trauma is not cured by justice alone. I began to write things down, keeping a diary of memories, thoughts, and patterns. It helped, but the basement, the jars, and the masks remained engraved in my mind. I realized survival was not the same as healing. A year later, we moved into a new apartment in another part of Oregon. The air smelled different, fresher, free of metallic undertones. Tyler laughed more easily, and I could sleep without the constant tremor in my chest. But the lessons remained. I watched people more carefully, trusted instincts above appearances, and understood that love and admiration could blind you to darkness. I could never forget my mother's calm cruelty, but I could choose how to live. At night, reflections still caught me off guard. Sometimes I shivered, imagining what might have been, but now I also felt a strange resilience, a knowledge that I had faced something unimaginable and survived. I had reclaimed control over my life, even if some scars were permanent. True evil often hides behind familiar faces and outward perfection. Survival requires vigilance, courage, and the willingness to confront uncomfortable truths. Trauma may linger, but strength comes from acknowledging the darkness, reclaiming your life, and refusing to let fear define your future. I spent 18 years of my life thinking perfection was a standard you had to obey or face consequences. My mother, Angela Dawson, made sure I learned that lesson every single day. From the outside, Maplewood, New Jersey, was the kind of town people bragged about. Manicured lawns, cherry blossoms lining sidewalks, neighbors who waved as you walked past. But our two-story colonial house, pristine and polished as it looked to the world, was a prison I could never escape. Mom was admired in the community. She hosted charity events, coached the local tennis team, and wore a smile that could melt strangers into admiration. She had that charisma, the kind that makes you believe someone is good, kind, untouchable. But inside our walls, her smile was a blade, a misplaced book, a streak of dust, or even the wrong inflection in my voice could ignite fury. I learned to anticipate her moods like a soldier anticipating enemy fire. The meals were timed with military precision: breakfast at 7, lunch at noon, dinner at 6. Any deviation earned a sharp slap or verbal attack so venomous, I would spend hours trembling on my bed, questioning myself. My father had left after the divorce years ago, leaving me alone with her scrutiny, alone with her obsession with control. I remember one spring evening in 2021 when the cherry blossoms outside swayed gently in the breeze. The town was calm, almost idyllic, but inside the tension was thick enough to choke on. I had spent the entire day at school, then hours cleaning, doing homework, and preparing for my mother's dinner with a few neighbors. I was exhausted, but I took pride in completing everything perfectly. Or so I thought. Mom's eyes landed on the TV. A tiny speck of dust clung stubbornly to the corner of the screen. It was insignificant, but she saw it. Her eyes narrowed, sharp as knives. "Emily, did I not tell you that even the smallest imperfection is unacceptable?" Her voice cut across the room, freezing the guests mid-bite. I froze, my stomach knotting. "I'm sorry, Mom. I didn't notice it," I stammered, voice trembling. Her fury erupted. It was not a controlled anger, this was something deeper, darker. She grabbed a kitchen knife from the counter with terrifying speed. Before anyone could react, she lunged. One of the guests, a neighbor who had always treated me kindly, tried to step in. Angela stabbed them. Blood sprayed across the white tile floor, hot and shocking, and the sound of screams filled the air. I didn't think. I ran, socks slipping against the hardwood floors, arms clutching myself to avoid the smell and sight of blood. I bolted out of the house and into the empty streets. The cherry blossoms seemed peaceful now, but I couldn't see beauty in anything. The neighbor had called the police. I collapsed on their doorstep, sobbing uncontrollably, unable to speak. By the time officers arrived, Angela was already screaming my name, her fury and obsession spilling into the night air. I didn't look back. I had survived. But part of me knew this was only the beginning of trauma I couldn't outrun. After Angela's arrest, I moved into a small apartment not far from Maplewood. I wanted independence, freedom, and a life that didn't include walking on eggshells for fear of making someone's temper explode. But escaping her physical presence did not erase the years of psychological control. At first, every shadow was suspicious, every creak in the floor or rustle of paper a potential threat. I flinched at voices behind doors, jump-scared by unexpected touches. Sleep was fitful. Daylight was no sanctuary. Even during simple chores, I imagined my mother's eyes judging, scrutinizing, waiting for a misstep. I began keeping a diary. I wrote every detail of my life, my thoughts, my fears. The act of writing felt like a lifeline, a way to disentangle my mind from the lasting effects of living under constant surveillance and cruelty. I called my best friend Mara nearly every night, talking through nightmares and memories, trying to normalize the chaos that lingered in my mind. The apartment was small but safe. I could lock doors without fearing her will somehow forcing them open. I could cook whatever I wanted, leave things untidy without punishment, and still breathe. And yet, the memories lingered. I would glance at my reflection and see flashes of her face overlaid on my own. Smiling, cold, judging. I would catch my reflection in a store window and flinch, imagining her watching, waiting for me to fail. Even mundane things, checking the stove, folding laundry, unlocking a mailbox, became exercises in self-awareness. I realized trauma isn't just what you survive. It's what you carry with you long after the danger has passed. Months passed. I enrolled in college courses, started working part-time at a cafe, and tried to build a routine. I laughed more freely, and Tyler, my younger cousin who sometimes stayed with me, seemed more relaxed. But the shadow of my mother's obsession never left. One afternoon, as I unpacked boxes from a coat I had donated, a meticulously folded note slipped out from a pocket. I froze. In careful, perfect handwriting it read, "Perfection is always watching." My heart skipped. It was like a physical blow to my chest. I realized with a mixture of horror and clarity that no matter how far I ran, no matter how independent I became, part of her control, her obsession with perfection, had embedded itself into my mind. It had created habits, anxieties, and reflexes that would take years to dismantle. I paced my apartment, heart racing. The note was probably unrelated, a coincidence, but it felt like a message from her, a reminder that perfection, in her twisted sense, was always observing. I forced myself to breathe, to remind myself I was safe now. But the lingering sensation of judgment was real. I could not unlearn it overnight. Nights were hardest. I would wake in cold sweats, haunted by the memory of blood on the kitchen tiles, the way her eyes seemed to pierce through me. Mirrors became instruments of paranoia. Every reflection reminded me of her obsession, her control, and my own vulnerability. I began therapy. The sessions were excruciating, peeling back layers of fear and shame I had carried since childhood. I learned that surviving her wasn't just about physical escape, it was about reclaiming my identity. I learned to notice triggers, to recognize anxious patterns, and to challenge the compulsions she had instilled in me. Gradually, I started setting small boundaries. I left dishes in the sink, skipped perfectly timed chores, and allowed myself to make mistakes without immediate self-flagellation. It was terrifying at first, but each small act of rebellion against ingrained fear was liberating. A year later, I felt more like myself, than I had in nearly 2 decades. The apartment was mine. The streets of Maplewood no longer harbored terror in my mind, and I could breathe without anticipating judgment. Tyler was happier, my friends supportive, and my life slowly felt normal. Yet, perfection's shadow lingered. Occasionally, when folding laundry or arranging a bookshelf, I caught myself holding my breath, remembering her standards. It was a reminder that trauma does not vanish. It transforms, leaving caution and awareness in its wake. I realized that surviving was not enough. Healing required conscious effort, vigilance, and self-compassion. I had reclaimed my life, but part of me remained shaped by what I endured. And maybe that was okay, as long as it strengthened me rather than imprisoned me. Trauma can follow you even after the danger has passed, embedding fear, control, and anxiety into daily life. True freedom is not merely escaping physical harm, but reclaiming your mind, boundaries, and sense of self. Survival is an act of courage, and healing is a continual process of recognizing the past while refusing to let it define your future. I still remember the bitter scent of burnt coffee that morning, clinging to the air like a warning. Dad had been tense for weeks, ever since his business collapsed and creditors started calling. That wasn't unusual for him, but what had changed was the intensity. Everything became a spectacle in his eyes, including us. Me, my little sister Lila, and Mom. We were actors in his obsessive performance, and somehow, we were always failing. It started innocuously. Cameras in the living room, the kitchen, hallways. Dad called it protection, but it didn't feel protective. It felt like surveillance. "You two sit there," he barked one evening, pointing to a corner of the living room. "I need to see how you react when things go wrong. Acting is everything." Mom stayed quiet, sinking into herself more each day. Her eyes seemed hollow, watching us as if she were already planning her escape. Then came the whispers. At first, I blamed my imagination, the old house settling. But one night I heard them clearly outside my locked bedroom door. "Who's there?" I whispered, my voice trembling. Silence. I pressed my ear to the door, heart hammering. I crept downstairs. Every security camera flickered with static except the attic camera. I climbed the narrow stairs. In the corner of shadows, Dad crouched muttering, "It has to be perfect. Betrayal. Perfect plan." Before I could move, he vanished. The living room was empty except for a note on the table. "I'm always watching." For years, Mom had been gone, or at least that's what we were told. Could she have returned? My pulse quickened. If Dad was gone, maybe the real danger had changed, and the house itself felt alive, whispering threats in every creak. After that night, the air in the house felt heavy. Every door creaked, every shadow seemed alive. I started noticing things. Doors unlocked when I was sure I'd locked them. Items moved from where I left them. My brain screamed it was paranoia, but my gut told me someone was inside. Dad's obsession had left me hyper-aware. I installed my own cameras, small, hidden ones, and began keeping a journal. Every oddity, every missing object, every whisper. Lila stopped asking questions. She just followed me, whispering her fear when she thought I wouldn't hear. One afternoon, I found Dad's old laptop buried under newspapers in the attic. It had files, hours of edited videos of us, clips twisted to make us look incompetent, scared, or cruel. My stomach churned. The man I'd grown up fearing had been shaping our lives like a director in a horror film. I confronted Mom's absence. Letters, phone calls, and even hired private investigators led nowhere. And yet, I kept feeling watched. Whoever was leaving notes, whatever, or whoever, was in the shadows. It wasn't Dad. Then I saw it. One night on a camera feed. A figure, familiar in posture, moving silently. Hair tied back, small frame, deliberate steps. My heart froze. Mom? Could it really be her? I ran to the spot the camera had captured, but the figure was gone, leaving only a scrap of paper. Not everything is as it seems. The revelation unsettled me more than Dad ever did. My family history wasn't just broken, it was living, breathing, and plotting. I started digging into Mom's life before her disappearance. Bills, her social media, old friends, nothing made sense. But patterns emerged. She'd been meticulous, patient, planning. Dad had always been violent, cruel, unstable. If anyone were capable of surviving him and turning the tables, it was Mom. One evening, the whispers returned. I followed them into the basement. Boxes of old possessions littered the floor. A photo album hidden beneath heavy blankets revealed Mom's careful observations of Dad's decline. Notes about arguments, threats, and even Dad's obsession with filming everything. It hit me then. Mom hadn't left because she gave up. She had vanished to survive, to learn, to wait. And now she was back, not to reconcile, but to take control, using Dad's reputation as the perfect mask. I felt a mix of relief and terror. Relief that Dad wasn't lurking, but terror that Mom had become something unrecognizable. Someone I didn't know. Someone beyond my understanding. The first note I found from her in weeks read, "I'm closer than you think. Trust no one. Not even your memories." I panicked, unsure if this was a game or a warning. Then I saw her, standing in the doorway, eyes sharp, quiet. "You knew he would ruin everything," she said softly. "I couldn't let that happen. He's gone, but the world remembers him." "Mom," I whispered, feeling a storm of emotions. Anger, fear, relief. "You left me. You left us." "I left to protect you," she said, calm but firm. "And now, I need you to understand that protection sometimes doesn't look like what you expect." Her plan was meticulous. Every letter, every whisper, every hint of danger had been orchestrated to ensure Dad's legacy couldn't hurt us. It wasn't cruelty. It was justice, twisted and precise. It took weeks to rebuild the house of my life, both literally and emotionally. Lila returned to normal routines. Dad's threats no longer haunted the walls. Mom stayed close but invisible, guiding without intrusion. I learned to sleep again, to trust again. The house, once a cage of fear and obsession, became a home filled with caution and understanding. I realized that life was fragile, and control could be a weapon if left unchecked. One night I found a final note from Mom. "Survival isn't about hiding. It's about knowing when to act." I smiled faintly, finally understanding. Sometimes the greatest dangers come not from outside, but from those we trust or fear. True protection often requires courage, foresight, and patience. And in life, control is a fragile illusion. Letting go, observing, and acting wisely can save not only ourselves but those we love. Dad was a celebrated theater actor once, someone whose name drew applause and admiration. The kind of man who could make an audience weep with a single glance, whose presence filled a room. But obsession, oh, it destroyed him. After a disastrous performance that went viral for all the wrong reasons, he spiraled, clinging to the idea that life itself was a stage and he was its master director. Growing up, our lives became his scripts. Mom, Lila, and I weren't just family. We were his cast, and every day was a rehearsal he refused to end. Cameras appeared everywhere. The living room, the kitchen, the hallway. At first, Dad called it practice, training us to respond naturally under scrutiny. But soon, it was more than that. "You're too stiff here," he'd critique over dinner, pointing at Lila's posture. "You hesitate, like you're hiding fear. Fear is vital. It shows authenticity." I hated it. Every glance, every casual gesture, became fodder for his analysis. Photographs taken without our knowledge lined the walls of his study, each annotated with cryptic notes. Test loyalty, observe reaction, measure hesitation. Mom tried to intervene. "This isn't healthy," she'd whisper in the kitchen, voice trembling. "You're turning them into experiments." Dad laughed, a sharp, hollow sound. Experiments? No, it's art. Life is art, Margaret. You'll see one day. It wasn't until I reached 16 that I fully understood the gravity of his obsession. One night I wandered into the basement, always locked, always off limits. That evening, the door was slightly ajar. Curiosity got the better of me. As I descended the steps, the smell of dust and old wood mingled with a strange metallic scent. The basement had been transformed into a stage. Childhood traumas were meticulously recreated. The cracked wall where I fell off my bike. The dented dresser where Dad punished me for lying. A single chair under a spotlight where I'd been forced to confess imagined sins. Dolls with my likeness sat on shelves, their eyes eerily lifelike, staring at me. Footsteps echoed behind me. Panic gripped my chest. I spun around, but no one was there. Hello? My voice barely carried over the silence. The lights flickered, and shadows danced across the walls. I rushed up the stairs only to find the main floor strangely empty. Dad had vanished, but he wasn't the only one. The next morning, the house felt heavier. I checked the cameras, but all the footage was corrupted, static eating away frames like a digital cancer. My parents seemed distant, Mom more so than ever, quiet and withdrawn. But Dad didn't appear in any recording. He hadn't left a note, hadn't called, just gone. At first I convinced myself he had stepped out for groceries, rehearsals, some mundane excuse. But the air of dread lingered, an invisible stage surrounding me. I started documenting everything, every strange noise, every missing object, every sensation of being watched. Lila joined reluctantly, whispering fears she wouldn't say aloud. A week passed. Then, at night, I heard voices in the basement. Low murmurs, rhythmic chanting almost. My hands trembled as I descended with a flashlight. The basement looked different. Where childhood traumas had been recreated, now there were rows of chairs facing a makeshift stage. Figures in hooded robes sat silently, faces hidden, eyes fixed on the empty chair under the spotlight. I froze. My chest tightened. "Who are you?" I demanded. Silence. Then a whisper, soft, almost teasing. "The performance continues." I bolted. Upstairs, I found Mom in the kitchen. "Do you know what's happening?" I asked. Her eyes widened and she shook her head slowly. I don't. But I felt it too. Something's wrong. It wasn't just Dad anymore. Whoever, or whatever, had taken over his work, his obsession, his experiments. They weren't going to stop. Over the next few nights, the sounds intensified. Footsteps pacing the hallways. Whispers in languages I didn't understand. The faint rustle of papers, like scripts being edited in real time. I tried to leave the house once, but the doors wouldn't unlock, as if the house itself was complicit. I started noticing things I hadn't before. Photographs of strangers in the frames Dad had kept for family pictures, scribbled notes in the margins of his old scripts. Observe reaction. Fear is genuine when unprovoked. Loyalty is fragile. One night, I returned to the basement with a crowbar, desperate for answers. The lights flickered, revealing figures moving like marionettes. As I stepped closer, I recognized the familiar cadence of Dad's voice on a recorder. Fear is the ultimate truth. Pain is the lens. Witness them, shape them, control them. I realized the horror. Dad had been dead for months. The voice, the notes, the recordings, they were all posthumous. And these strangers, this cult, were continuing his work, rehearsing our lives as if we were unwilling actors in a never-ending play. My sense of reality began to fracture. I'd walk into rooms and find them rearranged to mimic scenes from my childhood. Sometimes I would see a figure in the corner, shrouded, faceless, but somehow familiar, moving just at the edge of my vision. I confronted Mom. "This isn't just Dad. It's people. Cult members. They've taken over the house, our lives, everything." She hugged me tightly. "I know. I've seen them too. We have to survive, not fight blindly. You remember what he taught us. The lessons buried in the fear, the patterns. We have to use that knowledge now, using everything Dad had drilled into me, the cues, the timing, the behavioral patterns. I started to anticipate their movements. I learned to navigate the house at night without being seen, to avoid their cameras, to remain unseen. Survival was a performance, and I had to be the ultimate actor. The night I decided to end it, I returned to the basement for the last confrontation. The cult was there, the empty chair under the spotlight glowing ominously. I stepped forward, confident now in my understanding of the performance. "You don't control me anymore," I shouted. Silence. Then the whispers. "The audience demands perfection." I realized something crucial. Dad had died, but obsession didn't. Obsession had become a living entity, carried on by those who worshipped it, and I couldn't destroy it with anger or fear. I could only survive by recognizing the truth. Control was never theirs to wield. I escaped that night, careful, deliberate, leaving the basement empty, leaving the house behind. I walked into the street, the cold air biting, and I finally felt a sense of freedom. The shadows of Dad's obsession would always linger, but I had reclaimed my life, my mind, my reality. Obsession, unchecked, can consume not only the one who wields it, but everyone in their orbit. True control comes not from domination but from self-awareness, courage, and the willingness to step away from destructive patterns before they define you. Life is not a stage to manipulate. It is a reality to live, fully, freely, and responsibly.